This first lesson is an overview of object-oriented programming in JavaScript. The objectives for this lesson are to introduce you to the key terms used in object-oriented programming, learn the distinctions between classes and objects, implement properties within classes, incorporating methods into your classes, creating a constructor for classes, including private fields in classes, and utilizing static variables and methods. What are classes? Well, classes are simply templates that define the behavior of an object. They contain definitions of properties or data, methods, behavior, things that operate upon that data, and can even include events, reactions to things that occur. So examples of classes might be things like a blueprint of a house, an electrical schematic, a plumbing diagram. These are all things that are a template, but aren't something that you can touch in the real world. When we create classes in JavaScript, we have to be careful on how we name them. We want our class names to begin with a letter. In fact, they have to start with a letter. They can contain letters, numbers, and underscores after that first letter. They can be up to 255 characters long. And we name classes with nouns or noun phrases such as customer, person, product, things like that. We use Pascal casing, so we want an uppercase letter for our first letter in our class name. So customer with an uppercase C, not customer with a lowercase c. We also use a singular, customer instead of customers, product instead of products, etc. So when determining what should be a class in your programs, you think about any maybe physical item that you're modeling in the real world, such as a house, a car, a person, a bank statement. Things like that would be good candidates for a class. They can be technical concepts as well. A table in a database, a file in a folder, an email. Now each class has data, operations you can perform, and examples would be like a house class, you'd have number of windows property, number of doors property, a height, a width. You might have a set construction date method. You might have a calculate square feet method. So these are just some simple examples of where you have data and then operations that perform something on that data. Another example would be a table in a database. So you'd have columns collection, right? That's a property called columns. It's an array of column names like first name, last name, email address, things like that. You might have a row count property, so how many rows are contained within that table. You might have an insert, an update, and a delete method to make sure that you can do these operations of inserting, updating, or deleting data within that table. So we've talked about classes, but what is an object? Well, an object is simply an instance of the class. An object is that logical entity that you program against, that you work with. With each object, you can set properties, you can call methods, you can respond to and raise events. So remember, the actual house built from the blueprint is an object. It's something that you can touch and work with. The blueprint itself is the class. So how do we refer to objects in JavaScript? Well, we need some way to refer to the object, and we do that with a variable, just like you would with any value type, such as an integer or a Boolean. We let some variable name, movie in this case, equals new movie. There's the uppercase, so we know it's a class. And that creates a new instance then of that movie class. Or let product equal new product. There's that uppercase P there, and that's creating a new instance of that class that you can then interact with. So once again, just to reiterate the differences between classes and objects. A class is a blueprint or a template. An object is an instance of that template. For instance, you can't live in a blueprint, but you can live in a house because a house is an actual implementation or an instance of that class. You can't interact with a class, only an object. So let's dive into properties in JavaScript. Properties describe the attributes of an object. So the template defines the property, and then when you have an object, it's supplying the values. So for instance, let movie1 equals new movie, movie1.name. So now I'm accessing the name property of that object, movie1, that's an instance of movie, and I'm setting it equal to Caddyshack. Then I could display that on our console window. I also can have another variable, let movie2 equals new movie, movie2.name. So now I'm accessing that name property and I'm setting it equal to alien. And then again, that has that value contained within that name property, which is different from the name property in movie1. And so both of them, when I spin them out on the console window, will give me those two different values. When we talk about methods in JavaScript, we're talking about functions that are defined within that class. They can return a value or not. So for instance, if I say let entity equals new movie, I can call the set release date method and pass in some sort of value into that method if I want. Or I could call a method to insert a new entity, and I could say let new entity equals entity.insert, passing in some entity, and it gives me back whatever was then inserted. So they can either return a value or not return a value. You can have a constructor in JavaScript, and this is just a method with the name constructor. It's called when an object is first created. You can pass data to the constructor or not. You just add parameters to that method. But by default, there are no parameters. You can only have one constructor in each class. Let's take a look at passing arguments to the constructor method when instantiating the class. Now before, when I said let movie equals new movie, I just did an open close parenthesis, which meant no parameters were being passed in. In this particular scenario here, I'm saying new movie, open parenthesis, 1, comma, and then Young Frankenstein, comma, comedy, comma, Gene Wilder, comma, Marty Feldman. So it's passing in like a movie ID, the name of the movie, the genre of that movie, and the actors for that movie, which is then probably just setting the appropriate properties within that movie object. Like many languages, we have a concept of fields in JavaScript. These are a private variable within the class, and no code outside of the class can read or modify the data within a field. Only methods in the class can read or modify those fields. Also, like many object-oriented programming languages, you have the concept of static fields and methods in JavaScript. We define these fields and methods with the keyword static. Only one instance of that static field or method is created. It's created the first time the class is loaded into the page, and all instances of the class share that same data. We can reference these static fields or properties and methods using the class name, not the instance. You're always going to use the class name itself. We're going to see examples of all of these things coming up in this course. We also have the concept of inheritance in JavaScript. Now this is neat because you can create a class like a movie class with properties and methods. Then we can create a new class called rental movie and inherit from that movie class. This then gives you all the properties and methods from the movie class, but you're allowed to then add additional properties and methods that make sense for the rental movie class. Now to do this, we use the extends keyword. So that gives it all the functionality of the one that you're extending, and it allows you to add additional things on. And again, we're going to see examples of all of these things coming up soon in this course. Now you may be familiar with interfaces in other languages. This is a contract that defines property and methods, but no implementation of the code is available. A class implements an interface, so it supplies the actual code for that contract. However, interfaces do not exist in JavaScript. I just wanted to point that out here, just in case you start looking for them. So why do we use classes in JavaScript? Well, there are many reasons to use classes in any programming language. For example, encapsulation. This is where you're hiding the implementation of how something works. This allows you to change the implementation, and then any other code outside of this class doesn't even need to know about the change as long as it's still doing the same functionality. Inheritance is a wonderful reason for using classes because one class can be based on another. This eliminates a lot of duplicate code. Organization. We're grouping related data and methods in one class. This makes your applications more modular and manageable. Reusability. We can reuse the same class in many different parts of your application. Again, you're not duplicating any code. Maintainability is a huge thing. It's easy to optimize or fix a bug in a class, and that way you're only having to make that change in one place, because when you make it in one place, everywhere it's used in your application is now optimized or fixed. Small JavaScript applications may not need classes. Large, complex applications typically use classes. We use it to model real-world entities. We use it to model data storage information like tables, things like that. So lots and lots of reasons to use classes in your applications. So in this lesson, we discovered the differences between classes and objects. We learned a lot of different object-oriented programming terms such as properties, methods, constructors, fields, static variables, and methods. We're going to see examples of all of these coming up in this course. Coming up, define classes and methods in JavaScript.